Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something, well, truly bizarre and tragic. The Great Boston Molasses Flood of 1919.
It's one of those historical events that sounds almost made up, doesn't it? A flood of molasses.
Exactly. But it was devastatingly real. We've looked into the sources, articles, reports to understand, what happened, why, and its lasting impact.
Yeah, our mission here is really to pull out the key facts, the surprising details from this whole sticky mess.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's January 1919, Boston's North End. Think crowded, working class, lots of Italian immigrants.
Right on the waterfront.
And it's an unusually warm day for January after a cold spell. Dominating the view, this massive steel tank, like 50 feet tall.
Holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses. Owned by Purity Distilling, which was part of USIA.
And this molasses was big business, right? Not just for cookies.
No, not at all. It was vital for making industrial ethanol. Think munitions for World War I, which had just ended. Plus, Prohibition was right around the corner, so companies were stockpiling alcohol components.
Okay, so high demand. But there were warning signs about this tank, weren't there?
Oh, definitely. Locals knew it leaked. They said it groaned under the pressure. Kids would apparently collect the drippings.
Wow. So, this obvious danger just became normal background noise?
Kind of normalized, yeah. Which is chilling in hindsight. It speaks volumes about maybe how that community was viewed, or perhaps just a different attitude towards industrial risk back then.
So let's talk about the disaster itself.
Mm-hmm.
How did it start? This tank was built pretty quickly, wasn't it?
Very quickly, back in 1915, driven by that wartime demand and the looming Prohibition deadline we mentioned, USIA built it fast, maybe too fast.
In a community that maybe didn't have a lot of political clout to push back.
That seems to be part of the story, yes. Convenience and speed over maybe thorough safety checks.
Let's get into the construction flaws, because they're pretty alarming. The steel walls.
Yeah, the analysis done later showed they were dangerously thin, maybe only half the thickness required in some spots.
Half. That sounds incredibly risky.
It created enormous stress on the steel itself. We're talking like average stress levels way, way higher than the design likely intended. Very low safety margin.
And the steel quality was an issue too, right?
Yeah.
Something about manganese.
Exactly. Not enough manganese in the steel formulation. That made it brittle, especially in the cold.
Brittle.
Yeah.
So like glass instead of, tough metal.
Sort of. It means it was more likely to fracture suddenly under stress in cold weather, rather than perhaps bending or bulging first.
Yeah.
That ductile to brittle transition point was likely too high.
Okay. Thin walls, brittle steel. What else? The rivets.
The rivets holding the steel plates together were also overstressed, probably double the pressure they were designed for. This likely led to fatigue cracks starting around the rivet holes.
So the whole structure was just fundamentally unsound.
It seems that way. Evidence suggests the vertical joints failed first, essentially unzipping the tank.
And the oversight. Who is checking this?
Well, that's another major issue. The man overseeing it for USIA was the company treasurer, Arthur Gell. No engineering background.
A treasurer building a giant industrial tank.
Apparently. And reports say he cut corners. Crucially, they skipped a proper hydrostatic test, filling it with water, to check for leaks and structural integrity. They only used 6 inches of water.
6 inches? For a 50-foot tank?
Barely a puddle. And workers did raise alarms. They reported leaks, the groaning sounds. One even supposedly showed Gell a piece of fractured steel from the tank.
And the response?
Dismissed. The leaks were just caulked up, and eventually the tank was painted brown.
To hide the molasses stains.
That seems to be the most likely reason, yeah. Out of sight, out of mind.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So then comes January 15th, 1919. What happens?
They just pumped in a fresh shipment of molasses the day before, maybe 600,000 gallons added to an already nearly full tank. And this new molasses was warmer than the molasses already inside.
So the temperature difference.
Right. That rapid temperature change likely caused thermal expansion inside the tank. Some even speculate fermentation might have kicked in, producing CO2 gas. Either way, more pressure.
And then boom.
Around lunchtime, between 12:30 and 12:45 p.m., witnesses heard rumbling, a sound like tearing metal, rivets popping like machine guns, then a huge boom as the tank ruptured.
And the wave. I've heard estimates.
Initial estimates suggest a wave maybe 15 to 40 feet high, 160 feet wide, moving incredibly fast, maybe 35 miles per hour at first.
35 miles per hour. Made of molasses. That's terrifying.
It's hard to fathom, but the sheer weight and volume, it was a destructive force. That phrase, slow as molasses, really doesn't apply here, at least not initially.
What did it do? The damage?
Total devastation. Buildings are flattened, including Purity Distilling's own offices. A nearby house, the Clafferty home, was just swept away. The local firehouse, Engine 31, was badly damaged. Its frame buckled. It even damaged the elevated railway structure nearby. A train was stopped just in time. Vehicles, horses, wagons, just swept away and crushed.
And the human cost.
Tragic. 21 people died. Men, women, children playing nearby, workers, a firefighter just caught in it, and 150 injured.
How did most people die? Was it the impact or?
Often suffocation. Once the initial wave passed, the molasses cooled and thickened, trapping people. It was a horrific way to go. The individual stories are just gut-wrenching.
Was there a rescue effort?
Immediately. Police, firefighters, Red Cross nurses, even Army and Navy cadets from nearby ships rushed in, but the molasses made everything incredibly difficult. Rescuers got stuck, couldn't reach victims easily. It was a nightmare.
And the aftermath. Cleaning that up must have been.
Weeks. It took weeks just to make the area passable. They ended up using salt water, pumped from the harbor, to help break down the molasses and wash it away. But the stickiness lingered.
I've read stories about how everything in Boston seemed sticky for months. Doorknobs, train seats.
Yeah, people tracked it everywhere. The harbor itself was reportedly brown for months, and some claim they could still smell a faint, sweet molasses scent on hot days for decades after.
Decades. Wow. The property damage alone was immense, right?
Estimated at over $100 million in today's currency. A huge blow.
So, accountability. What happened? Did USIA take responsibility?
Not initially. Over 100 lawsuits were filed against them, eventually consolidated into one major case. USIA's defense strategy was interesting.
How so?
They claimed the tank was blown up by anarchists or Bolsheviks, pointing to post-war tensions. They spent a lot of money, maybe $50,000 back then, trying to prove this bomb theory.
Was there any evidence for that?
Ultimately, no. A court-appointed auditor, Hugh Ogden, conducted a thorough investigation over several years.
And his conclusion?
In his 1925 report, Ogden definitively ruled out a bomb. He placed the blame squarely on structural failure due to USIA's negligence.
Negligence covering.
Pretty much everything we discussed: inadequate design, substandard materials, poor construction methods, the lack of proper testing, and crucially, ignoring all those warning signs.
So the court ruled against USIA?
Yes, it found USIA legally responsible.
What was the penalty?
They were ordered to pay out over $600,000 in damages. That's anywhere from maybe $8 million to over $30 million today, depending on how you calculate it. Families of those who died received around $7,000 each.
Which sounds like not much now, but was significant then.
It was considered a substantial sum, yes. And more importantly, it was a landmark judgment. It really helped establish the principle of corporate accountability for public safety.
So this bizarre flood actually led to real change.
Absolutely. It was a huge catalyst for safety reforms, particularly in Massachusetts, but with influence beyond. Things like requiring registered engineers and architects to actually sign off on plans and calculations.
Makes sense.
Mandatory safety inspections for construction projects, proper permitting processes for large structures, even things like professional licensing for engineers gained momentum.
So a shift from just letting companies police themselves.
Exactly, a move towards government oversight and standardized safety regulations. It also set a precedent for handling mass tort cases, sort of an early form of class action lawsuits.
It's amazing how such a strange event could have such far-reaching consequences for, engineering standards and public safety.
It really is a tragic lesson learned.
So wrapping this up, the Great Molasses Flood. It's this incredibly weird, almost surreal image, a tsunami of sweetener. But underneath the strangeness is a very real story of industrial disaster born from, cutting corners and ignoring warnings.
The human cost to that North End community was immense and immediate.
Yeah. And it really hammers home why things like engineering standards, proper oversight, and corporate responsibility aren't just bureaucratic red tape. They save lives. The reforms that came out of this have made a difference.
Definitely a lasting legacy from a sticky tragedy.
It really makes you think, though, where today might similar pressures, the put for speed, for profit, for innovation, potentially lead us to overlook hidden dangers.
Are the safeguards we have now truly enough? Something to consider.